This is one of our major themes this year. It's a major theme across the globe. Actually, it's the future of work, and a lot of that's come out of the pandemic. Started before the pandemic. The pandemic was a bit of a bullet train that sped it onto a whole new plane. A lot of what I'll show you today is based on research that we've done with a number of partners over the last year across the globe, across about 1,000 global enterprises, across APAC, across Europe, and across America. So a lot of what I show you today is about the outcomes of that research and how other businesses are seeing the future of work. I'm going to touch a lot on culture and leadership and leave the tech stuff to the end, because actually, as we all know, culture eats strategy and tech for breakfast, and a lot of this is a cultural challenge. So what is a Zedonk? I'll tell you now, and please don't leave after I tell you. Zedonk is basically a zebra and a donkey, and the analogy is that it's one day you're not a donkey and the next day you're not a zebra. You're a Zedonk, and the analogy is you're no longer just at home or just in the office. Work is a whole new breed, and this is a new breed of animal. It's probably not entirely new, but the acceleration and pace of it brings with it a whole raft of new challenges, and largely cultural and leadership challenges rather than tech challenges. And one observation from Professor Grattan is the big danger, and we've all done it, is to bring bad practice into this new age of the hybrid worker or the Zedonk world. A lot of what I'll talk about today, there is no one answer. We are in a state of flux. We are experimenting, and that's a good thing, as long as we learn from that. There probably is no one answer to this new animal that we're all dealing with across the world. But I suppose the key message in this is don't follow locations, follow the work. And what is the work about, rather than the location you're doing that work in? And that is some way to giving a principle to dealing with the problem. So big news is, I think during the pandemic, everybody thought the office was dead. The office is not dead. It's just a different thing. It should be a different thing. The office is still very much alive. So this study shows that actually on the extremities, the 5 days in the office and the 5 days at home are gradually becoming obsolete. There will always be people that do that, but this whole world is now in the middle there, in this weird world of home, train, cafe, work, or an office, and how do you accommodate all of that? What is quite interesting is only 4% of people don't work in an office or a home. It's quite small. Maybe that reflects some of the organizations that took part in this. But even field force workers go into an office or work from home now. So the office isn't dead, and probably from BT's perspective, we've reduced our office estate by about 1,000 buildings in the last 2 years. And our principle has been less offices, but much, much better offices. So really, really good accommodation and the right type of layouts. So not banks or desks. It's a whole new type of office. And what we've seen, and I'll come on to some of the motivations for employees, is people will only go to a good office. They're not going to go to a rubbish office. And bear in mind, we had a lot of exchanges, which are horrible offices that people worked from. But we made a conscious decision to rationalise and invest heavily in those properties to make sure that they were really good properties. And some companies are actually offering free lunches on a Monday to get people in on a Monday. And we haven't gone that far, but hopefully soon. Some of the challenges around the Zedonk or the hybrid organisations is the workforce talent dilemma. Getting workforce talent, as difficult as it is, but actually this talent is now demanding that flexibility. And if we're asking them to go into an office, they want a really good office with table tennis tables and all that weird stuff and bean bags and collaboration spaces. But that is a real challenge, is retaining staff. And flexibility for them is actually more important than salary, or on a par with salary. Sustainability is really important for employees. Not just the commuting and how they get there and all the carbon, but actually in that office, is that office carbon neutral? Are we monitoring it? How are we monitoring the flow and using it? Because offices are one of the biggest contributors to carbon. And the office itself is transformation. As I said, less offices, but much, much better offices and different layouts. And an office that you actually want to go into and feel quite proud to go into. And it's amazing how many people haven't actually invested in their office space because they thought it was dead, but it's not dead. Big issue is culture. If everybody's out in office, away, wandering around the streets or at home, how do you create a culture within that organization? Really difficult to do that on Zoom or Teams. Creating a culture in 2D is not as effective as face-to-face. And well-being is a massive issue. And well-being on both sides of the house. The well-being of your commute into an office and back again. How does that make you feel? Does it stress you out? And also the other side of it, being at home alone. How does that well-being affect you? Collaboration ease is still, despite all the technologies you see out there, and some really cool technologies out there, and we have cool technologies out there, doesn't always work. It breaks down, and it's difficult, and it's really difficult to communicate in 2D, and in a hybrid world, to collaborate physically and virtually is my personal nightmare. I hate going in virtually to a meeting when there's a room of about 10 people in there. I don't know who they are, where they're sitting, and I can't hear them. It's not a meeting, it's not collaboration. It's a them and us culture. And that for me is one of my biggest bugbears, is going into, there's a whole lot of physical people there. I'm virtual, and actually nobody ever talks to me because I'm just a little postage stamp in the corner of the room. They can't actually even see me. Security is also mentioned as a large one. So obviously the pandemic, connectivity, cloud, collaboration was massive during the last 2 years, and has been in helping support collaboration. And all the stuff out there is fantastic, and there's more stuff on the horizon which I'll come on to at the end. But at the end of the day, culture will kill it all. Unless we address the culture issue, it will kill it. And one of the biggest problems, certainly we've seen from research, is proximity bias. I live in Edinburgh. All my bosses are in London, and part of my team's in London, some in Belfast, some in Manchester. And you do get that feel that they're walking into an office, having a coffee, a chat. They're near bosses, they're near people, they're networking. Am I being left out all the way up here in Edinburgh? And to go and do the same, I have to jump on an aeroplane, spend carbon, spend lots of money. So am I out of sight and out of mind? And that's a real fear for a lot of people and all levels of organizations. I think synchronicity is a really interesting one, particularly in hybrid meetings. You all know there's a meeting before the meeting and a meeting after the meeting. The actual meeting is not really the meeting. So when you're in that virtual world, in that meeting, the real business has been done before people come in and when they leave that office. So you're not getting visibility of all the conversation or all the work. And that's a real, we all know it. In fact, sometimes we have pre-meets for meetings. And so physically, people are in the room, business is done that you're not part of. Time factor, and I love this. We've got a system in Belfast that monitors traffic and movement of people and thing. And actually, when we look at the trends of that, it no longer talks about a rush hour, it talks about rush days. And I'm sure you all, when you're on the school run, a Wednesday is the worst day to go in, because that's when everybody's actually going into the office. School run on a Monday, Friday is really easy, because nobody's going into an office. So it's kind of like Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. I think it spells twat in an acronym. That's kind of huge problematic for actually how you manage cities as well, because suddenly there's a rush on those days. An office is pretty much empty. If I go into my office, wherever it is, whether it's London, Birmingham, on a Monday, there's literally nobody there. When I go on a Friday, there's literally nobody there. That's a complete waste of space. How do you deal with that? So we no longer have rush hours. We have twats and rush days. I think buzz, serendipities are really ones, being spontaneous. We all know around being in an office, being with people, or actually even with your people in a coffee or somewhere, new ideas come out of that. It's much more difficult in a hybrid world. Leadership is a really interesting one. Leadership is a challenge for leaders anyway, but how do they lead in this hybrid world where they don't know where people are? Trust is a really interesting one. One of my colleagues was telling me that actually you can monitor people virtually quite a lot. Keyboard strokes, mouse movements, are they speaking over the phone? And people do that. To the extent that some people put their mouse on a fan so it moves around. So if they go off for a couple of hours, it feels like they're at work. But that trust issue, and Microsoft have a lot of really cool productivity tools, but can't tell you what you're actually doing and not doing during the day. So trust is a big issue around, for leaders who don't trust their staff. That's a real issue. But again, that goes back to focusing on the work. You should trust your staff if you set them the right outcomes. And I suppose all those things I think we've all experienced personally in different ways. We certainly take the approach that we experiment, both as an organisation, but in my team, we get feedback. Is that a rubbish meeting, or could we do that differently, or or how do we communicate better? Because everybody is different. Meetings, we all love a good meeting, and meetings. I think the stats show that meetings went up by about 50% over the pandemic, the number of meetings, but the length of those meetings was 20% shorter. So they were quicker, but there was more of them. And I'm sure all of you at some point were sitting there looking at your diary going, how the hell do I do this? And interesting, meetings finish at 10 and start at 10. So the classic message, just wrapping up. Simple, so you're not actually even giving yourself 10 minutes to take a breather from the last one. You're wrapping up. And how many times have you had that message, just wrapping up, and so everyone arrives late and then knocks on? Video calls is gone exponential, and meetings are, if I'm honest, some of the old tech like the telepresence is brilliant when they've got high definition, big screens, good sound. Laptops and Teams is not the best for videos and video calls, and sound is the number one technical problem people have, so they can't hear somebody. So I think the other issue about meetings is virtually or on the move or physically and augmented is more pressures now. That they say the key skill in those meetings is a very good facilitator, because there's so much going on. There's people on trains cutting out, there's people in the room physically, and now the big one is IM. A lot of the introverts use IM. It's a really good way for getting introverts who don't like to speak too much, certainly don't want to see themselves speaking back at them in a mirror, so they IM a lot. And the facilitator's missing the IM, suddenly your meeting's having a different conversations going on, and the people in the physical room aren't seeing that IM message. So that synchronicity, and the facilitator of these meetings is absolutely critical. So there's a third place for work now. It's not just the office, it's the home, it's the cafe, it's the dreaded train call. Although I work for BT, I'm always surprised at how poor wireless is on trains. It just doesn't work. So you can have people all over the place driving. My car is actually my office, and I'm not a comfortable third place person. I like to be in an office or somewhere where everything's stable. I hate doing meetings in my car. Don't think it's productive. Some people love it because they love driving around in their car. So some of the research we did looked at how did hybrid work help people's well-being, and why did it help their well-being? And number one actually came out in commuting, which I think is actually a pretty good thing, pretty obvious. And that was the number one reason why they wanted to stay in the home, because they didn't want to commute. And I think it's really interesting when you see how we cope with things like rail strikes or tube strikes. We cope much better with those now, because we do have the ability just to work from home very quickly. I'm less distracted. There's less social chit-chat. I can fit in more meetings amazingly. I don't know why that's a benefit. That's my version of hell. I love the bottom one there, where I like having my pets nearby. And there's something psychological in that. A lot of people bring their pets on calls because it is quite comforting and probably de-stressing. I find that I don't have a pet, but I might get one after that one. My manager interferes less. That's certainly not my experience, but I think that's a good thing. I'll come on to some of the managerial behaviours. Why do you feel less productive? And interestingly, I get distracted more at home. So distraction is top of both. And I think that probably says something more about human beings. I don't know about you, but I'm a butterfly. I get distracted by anything, a bird or the postman arriving, or someone wanting a coffee. So funnily enough, some of the things that are top at home are the same things in the office. Some of the different ones are team synergy. I think that probably has suffered quite a lot. So there's some similarities and some difference. One of the interesting outcomes of the hybrid is the death of Dolly. This is a term, my colleague uses, which is basically death of 9 to 5. And I think the death of 9 to 5 was probably a good 10, 15 years ago, but it really is dead now. But it brings with it real dangers. It brings with it real pressures on people, and people deal with it differently. There's technical overload. I work for a technology company, but I'm absolutely useless at Teams. I still can't share properly. I still get confused with OneShare and all this stuff, and I find it mind-boggling, never mind non-technical people. So there is a technical overload. Things change. Suddenly somebody releases a new version. You're like, my God, my world's turned upside down. How does this work? And the complexity. I think the two most interesting ones are the two last ones. Techno-invasion, so messages, meetings and managers don't usually respect 9 to 5 anymore. And you can get those at any time on any blinking device. And I don't know about you, but I've got one device for work and home, which is probably a bad mistake because it starts bleating at the middle of the night. And so actually that whole ability to switch off has become a real issue. And funnily enough, it's actually highest amongst millennials. They have, they're constantly on the phone, and maybe that's their background. I think it's a little bit about they're going up in the world, so they're building their networks, their careers taking off, whereas maybe some of the baby boomers are a bit more chilled and relaxed about life. So they're not going to do the 9 to beyond the 5 o'clock, and job insecurity. And I think the really good quote there from Kevin Kelly in Wired was, the problem is not that we can't connect, is the problem is we can't disconnect, and that's a real danger. Just going back to the third place, interestingly enough, some studies done by Financial Times showed that the third place, the 3 days in the office or at home or wherever, is actually the biggest carbon footprint. They're going into an office or staying at home. Just moving around all the time, different places, is actually got the biggest carbon footprint. So just to finish on the tech, and I'm not a huge fan of video calls and Zoom or Microsoft if you're in the room. I find it doesn't suit the way I work. I'm an extrovert, I'm social. And how does tech bridge that 2D gap, that horrible two-screen where you don't really meet anybody, you can't really see them, you can't really hear them. And the world is going into the metaverse. I know Facebook are making a big thing about this. I don't know if any of your kids do Roblox. Bane of my life, you kind of buy a hat for £5, it's a virtual hat. But if you look at Roblox, they go in and they build my kid's 9, he's built a city. He works as well, he's got a pizza delivery van. He's a pizza delivery driver, and he's got a 7-bedroom mansion. It's amazing. But they all build each other's houses, and those are kids coming through, and they're used to that world. And how do we move beyond the 2D screen? And some of the stuff we've been working on is, during lockdown, we worked on an immersive classroom. Kids used to go out and visit the Titanic or Edinburgh Castle, so we brought that to them so they could have this in their classroom in a virtual world. Health is a really interesting area for going into that whole virtual, how you monitor people virtually, how do you get hold of a GP virtually, how do you do things that you probably wouldn't do, like land an airplane. I don't know if you've seen the EE ads. But even the workforce out there are using augmented reality. And I know Facebook and likely Twitter will start to play into this space, because actually that whole virtual world is quite fragmented. And the ambition is, how do you bring that together, and why can't you bring that together and work, where it's much more rich. And probably one of the most impressive scenes I've seen is this is going towards Scotty and Star Wars and stuff, is volumetrics. So people actually like me could be standing here with various sensors, and I could actually be in Dubai as a hologram speaking to the same audience in a very rich environment. And we're seriously looking at some customers who work internationally with that. How do they get people like me, rather than just looking at a screen or a playback, actually standing in a room with people as a hologram? So a really interesting area. All this needs digital infrastructure. It needs really good digital infrastructure, because this will explode, will get bigger, there'll be more data, there'll be more video streams, it'll be needed everywhere, across sector. And to do that, and by digital infrastructure, I don't just mean networks and 5G and all that stuff. I mean data exchanges, I mean how you present that to people, how people present that on their mobile phones. And So we have lots of documents on our, that's worked, is it? On our website, so on all of this, to go into much depth with the real experts. I'm not the real expert in this, so we've got people that look at this in quite a bit of depth. My message is, it's a really interesting time. I think technology's on the verge of something interesting, but the real thing is culture and leadership, and technology's not going to solve this problem. I personally am a huge fan of hybrid working, not necessarily in my car. I think it's a really good thing, but we need to understand what the trade-offs of that. So thank you very much.
Questions?
Yeah, thank you very much for this presentation. It was really good and very informative. What I would like to ask you, when it comes to technology, it keeps growing and growing. When it comes to organizational perspective, should the technology inform the strategy, or the strategy should inform the technology?
So the question is for everybody: should technology inform the strategy, or strategy inform the technology? I think the outcome should inform the strategy, and the strategy should always inform the technology. The technology can't inform. I think it's got a huge enabling role. I think it should be taken account of. I think the difficulty with technology is when, how far ahead do you look and take the risk to bring in really new stuff before it becomes mass market. But absolutely the strategy. I think there's other people in the technology world, probably chief technology officers would completely disagree with me. They think they should be in charge of the organization. I think it should be the strategy. But I also think the strategy should also be informed by well-being of the people working in an organization. That should be a key part of your strategy, because without that, nothing else works. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Hi, two questions, if I may be to go. First one.
Are they allowed 2 questions?
You mentioned about the fact that the concentration piece, the ability to be distracted, both in the office and I'm wondering if you would agree. My hypothesis in this is that's nothing to do with work. That's to do with the environment we live in, and the fact that kids will only watch no more than a 3-minute video, or some would say a 9-minute video, and that very much drives that constant. We need constant stimulation, and I think that's rife. I don't know if you'd agree with that point or not.
I do, and I think it's, and I'm guilty of not actually taking a bit of time to think about things more deeply. Mm-hmm. You're suddenly on to the next thing. I'm also, I see a butterfly and I'm away. I'm not one of these people that if there's something else new and shiny, I'm drawn to it. So but I absolutely agree. I think and one of the things I do is Microsoft's actually, some of it's quite good. I put focus time on every week, every day. That means nobody can actually contact me. So that's my time, as my focus. So people can't actually even message you or get through to you, which is fantastic. Mm.
Indeed, yeah.
But I agree. I think it's endemic in society.
And also as well the fact that we talk a lot about strategy, but everything in the world around us pushes us to work in a tactical, short-term, short-focused manner. But we keep talking about strategies, but we don't. Meetings are getting manned more, and that's really insightful. The meetings, more meetings and less time in them.
Yeah.
So it's all everything's about.
Yeah.
And my second question is: do you think the phrase "work-life balance" is dead?
Do you know? It's funny you say that. I haven't heard it in a while. I haven't actually heard it's good for your work-life balance, whatever that means. I use the word Zedonk, so that just confuses everybody. But I haven't heard it, so maybe it is. And I think that's a sign of, pre-pandemic, everyone talks about work-life balance. And I suppose now it's balance, really, isn't it? And, unfortunately, the two emerging, and it's how you personally cope with that is really important. I mean, I think the worst time between the pandemic was having 3 kids at home, trying to teach them and work. But I also saw culturally that people weren't ready for this, because teachers were sending stuff through email, asking it to be printed off, photocopied and sent back, which made me think, wow, this is, I think it is dead. I haven't heard it for a while. I've heard hybrid a lot, and that'll probably be dead in a year as well. It'll be something else. Zedonk will be there forever, though.
May I take congratulating you in getting the word Zedonk into the title. Just for that alone, I turned up.
So, well, that's what I said. So, and listen, I take no credit for this. All these papers here have been written by my colleague, Dr. Nicola Millard. She's a genius. She's brilliant. So go on our website, look for her. She's on Google. She does a lot of insightful stuff around this, and she's the creator of all this information.
More questions? Oh,
How do you think the cost of living crisis is going to affect hybrid and remote working in particular, with people not necessarily wanting to keep a flat they would normally not be in if they could go to the office?
So just in case people didn't hear that, how's the cost of living going to affect how people work? Is that right, or where they work? I mean, there's evidence of people going into the office so they don't have to, because it's warm, and I don't know, if I'm honest with you. I think it is a challenge, and some organisations I think are looking at how they compensate people for that. I suppose the offset of that is actually leaving the house tends to be an expensive thing to do, because you're paying for travel or food, or you grab a coffee. If I stay at home, I don't spend any money. If I go out and having a coffee and meeting someone for a drink or lunch or something, suddenly I'm like, so it's a real balance. I don't know the answer to it. I think next year that will probably be a study. How did that affect how people worked? And I think it'd be really interesting.
I'm just challenging that.
The third question.
No, it's not. It's a challenge, actually. Sorry, it is a challenge, not a question. Actually, you do spend money when you're at home, but just you don't outlay it out of your pocket.
Exactly, yeah. It's not coming out. You're right, you are spending money, yeah. But you could put a jumper on and woolly hat and stuff. I've seen people on calls with woolly hats. I've done it. I put a jacket. Why have you got your jacket on? Because I'm not putting my heating on. You look stupid, but it saves you a bit of money, yeah.
I have a question.
Really, Theo?
Yeah, I know. Should I be allowed to heckle you? Has it affected, or how do you see it affecting people's recruitment strategies?
Yeah.
Especially for remote working and obviously access to a global workforce?
So two things to that. One, I don't know what your experience is, but recruiting is difficult. It's a hard market just to get people anyway. So they are coming in with demands, and the research in there showed that flexibility in where and how you work is higher than your salary. So you're going to have to offer this, whether you like it or not. So I think it's going to be huge, particularly amongst millennials and below that, who are coming into coming through the ranks of the organisation. I think it's. And I've not that I've been looking for jobs. I hasten to say anybody in BT is in here, but I see that top of the list. Work from anywhere is the first thing some people put on adverts, because they know that's really important to people. It's really important to me. I need to know that, because I don't want to be told I'm going to go and move to London. Yeah. But great question, Theo.
Thank you.
Are there any organisations that are held up as the gold standard that have been able to build or maintain a good, strong culture throughout the remote working and help to build teams and ensure well-being and get positive results for staff and the business at the same time?
Yeah, BT. I'm joking. No, yeah. I'm not going to name any company. There's some companies that have gone the opposite, actually. That actually behaved quite. Do you know? I have to say, I'm just speaking to friends and anecdotally, I think a lot of companies have done really well, and a lot of companies that might surprise you, like law firms or financial institutions, that I think I've seen the. I mean, we have always been very good at this at BT. We've been doing this for 20 years. It's not when the pandemic hit us, it made no difference at all. Nothing. Everyone was ready for it. I think some surprising sectors have done really well. I'm not going to name any particular companies because that'd be unfair, but some actually who you thought would be good, like in the tech sector, not so well. And they're the ones checking the mouse movements and stuff like that. So I think if you look at it from a sector perspective, it's been really, really interesting. The financial sector, legal, that whole, have done very, very well. Public sector have always been quite good at this. Tech sector actually is interesting. How well the tech sector has done in that, I'm not so sure. I don't know if you got any good examples of.
No, that's why I was.
All right, okay. I'll email you some. I'm not going to do any names, but I'll email you some.
Yeah, I wonder if there's been studies done, or if it's still too early for that kind of thing, where we can see things that these people have done and it's common across them that other people that we can adopt.
Do you know what? I'll check some of these and see if there's any case studies in there, because there'll be case studies in there around this. Yeah. Yes.
There you go, miss.
Sorry, there's a really tall guy in front of you, and I can't.
Have there been any studies that have been done about the employee trainings during the hybrid
Employee trends.
yeah,
What's happening, how they... again, I'll refer you to these. There'll be some information in there. I think... and I'll send you some links to stuff. But I think it's a fascinating area. How have people really come out of this, and how do they think and feel? And I'm sure some of that information is in there, and I can send those to you. Sure.
It's interesting to see you've got pretty much a 50-50 split on the opinion surveys. People who like being in the office and people who don't. What I've seen in my team is that kind of clash. So if you've got a team who's supposed to work together, you've got people who prefer to work at home and then people who prefer to work in the office. When it comes to actually working together, I guess their performance can clash. You get a bit of resentment if you ask people to come to the office to help that other person, and someone at home trying to help them doesn't really work for them because they're struggling at home.
Yeah.
How do you kind of balance that out?
So we've struggled with that a lot, and we now have a BT have a policy. It's called 2 together, 3 anywhere, 3 wherever, and 2 together is you need to be with your team 2 days a week in some capacity, usually in office, and 3 wherever. So that can be with a customer, on the phones, or visiting. Now it's not strictly week by week, but it's a rule of thumb, because I know a lot of organisations are struggling to bring people. They won't come back. My view is, I used to be really pro home working. I'm now pro office working, ironically, because I just think the serendipity, the buzz, the creativity is in an office. It's not at home. If I want to, some people, funny enough, some people, the opposite argument is some people who are told to go into an office, go into that office, spend all day in a Teams call, and then go home. This is where it's about the work. If you're on a Teams call, they don't go into your office, stay at home. But if you've got something creative to do, don't go on a Teams call, go into the office and do it. But it is. I know it's a problem for a lot of organisations, is getting people back in.
Okay.
It's just on that point really, to say that we've kind of done a lot of research on remote working, and as a recruiter, we found that
there it is,
a lot
yeah.
of companies, if they thought they kind of pass a job over and say we want them in 3 days a week,
Yeah.
it's so difficult to
Yeah.
recruit for them. We almost say that
Yeah.
we can't do it. We need to be 2 days max and
Yeah.
remotely if possible.
Yeah. That's really insightful. And I can't imagine they're not going to get the right candidate because the really good folk want flexibility above everything else. We all want flexibility. We've got kids, pets, and things to do, doctor's appointments, really good thing. But if you demand people come in, and although we've got a two together, we say very carefully together, that's about face to face. It's not about we need to utilise these wonderful offices. It's about you need to be together because it's good for work.
Do you think operational delivery models will change? So when you're saying creative people come into the office, that's a value-added task. So when you look at more protective tasks, people sitting there doing phone calls or data entry, that'll be automated. So if you have a sell-off of that.
I didn't actually. Yeah, I mean RPA and automation. I mean my view on it is it's a good thing because as human beings we're really bad at administration. I mean, we're rubbish at it. But empathy and creativity we're really good at it. Computers are really bad at it. So that's the balance. It's RPA and automation will change business models, but it shouldn't reduce jobs. It should free up time to be more creative, innovative, spend time with people, spend time with your family as well, because we are rubbish at administration as human beings. Computers are really, really good at it. It's when they become robots and AI that's different matter.
Got one more. Can't remember if it was on the actual slide deck, but how difficult is it to maintain a training and onboarding, or even onboarding, actually starting with onboarding if someone is obviously remote or wants to be remote, and then there's obviously training as well, like ongoing professional development, and that and it requires different types of equipment or something like that. Was that in there?
It's not. I mean, I'll actually probably defer to the recruiter on that one. It's do you know, I think it's been really difficult. I can only speak from my personal experience of go on this course or do this, and I'm on some sort of leadership course, and found it really, really difficult. Remote training. Some people like it because they're introverts and they like using the IM, and they're probably shy about going into a room full of people. For me, it's been really detrimental. I just can't. In fact, if I'm honest, and I hope this is not going to broadcast live anywhere, I've given up doing a lot of training during the pandemic. I'm back doing it now because I much prefer an environment with physical people in it. But I can imagine for HR, it's really, really difficult in trainers. And keeping people's skills up in this mad world we live in is a real challenge.
There's been an impact on the diversity of your workforce through hybrid working and being able to propose a job for someone, say, for people across the country rather than specifically in one location?
So, I speaking from our perspective, it's not had no impact at all. In fact, it's more diverse. I think diversity is an interesting one because there's many aspects to it. I think one of the interesting things is around meeting cultures is really interesting as well, because sorry guys, but guys can be interrupt and loud in meetings. It's probably been better because it's more equitable. I think we've been able to recruit from different parts of the country in different ways. I think it's helped actually, if anything. I'm certainly seeing it. I'm feeling it in my team. So yeah, I think if anything, it's been beneficial.
Time for one more.
My question is about neurodivergent, the recruitment of neurodivergence during the hybrid culture. Has it been affected, or has the hybrid
I think I know what how different people, how does it affect different people with different ways of thinking and stuff? Is that right?
For neurodivergent?
Yeah. Do you know, I'm going to be honest, I don't know the answer to that, so I'm not going to even try and answer it because it sounds far too clever for me and intelligent. But I think it's a really interesting one. And again, I'm happy to be into contact with Nicola, who's a real expert in this. I'm not even going to pretend to know the answer to that one. I'm sure there has been, and it'd be really interesting to see what it has been. Yeah.
Simon, thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Thank you, folks. Thank you.